Oh, hello. Thought I would do a little weekend stream. Cause I made a discovery yesterday. I been doing these streams with Danilo at Code Sandbox. We've been playing around with implementations of some flows and using impact, really exploring like data fetching boundaries, suspense, and all of this stuff. Mm. And we have been using a very explicit like query mutation API because the current solutions out there are related to like use query and use SWR and stuff like that. And then you have this thing coming in of official like promise support in components from React, and all of this has kind of culminated into this idea I've been playing with here, which I'm really happy about. And let's see if I can show you here. So I'm in the family project and we're here in the family store, and like normally when you define a signal, you define it with like a value, right? And when you look at this signal, it has a value, and that value is a string. Now, if you were to like store a promise and consume a promise from a signal, initially it doesn't make any sense. But take a look at this. Because what I'm doing here now is that I'm creating a signal out of fetching this family document. And this promise is just a normal promise. There's nothing special about that. But when you add a promise to a signal now, it converts it into a signal promise. So it takes a normal promise in, but the value you get out is a signal promise. And there's nothing special about this. Like, it's not a new class or anything like that. It's the same promise, but it's populated with status. And if that status is pending, it's just pending. If it's fulfilled, the promise will also have a value property, and if it's rejected, the promise will have a reason property. And this is exactly what suspense expects from promises. But what's really cool about this is that internally inside this signal, when the promise changes its state, the signal updates. So you basically get an observable promise by just putting a promise into a signal. So the signal triggers when the promise goes to fulfilled or to rejected. And what's also really cool about this, if we look, did I start doing this at the grocery store? Yes. So if we look at the grocery store, which I also refactored, we're going to refactor a bunch more stuff here to explore. But here we have the same thing. I have my groceries. I'm getting the groceries from a Firebase document. It's just a promise. And then I return these groceries here, just like you would do with normal signal. But if we take a look here, I'm also listening to updates to these groceries. And what I do is, just like a signal, I just update the value. But I update the value with a new promise. And sometimes this promise might reflect like a new fetching, like I would do like Firebase get docs again. But in this case, I'm just updating from an event. And that's why I'm doing promise resolve, right? Because it is a promise, but I already have the value here coming from an event. So I'm using promise resolve to put like a valid promise into the signal again. So that shows you how you can just initialize with a promise, you can just update it with a promise, and it's just a value that you can consume. Only that the value will self-update based on the state of the promise. So that's one thing. A detail about this is that when you set a promise as a value, it will actually wait a microtask before it notifies an update to the signal. And that is because there's no reason to notify a pending state here, really, because it's asynchronously updated. So you don't care about that pending state, especially because it is already resolved. It's just that you have to wait a microtask to know that it's actually resolved. So this is handled by the signal. So when you do a promise resolve on the value of a signal that has a promise, it will only notify when it's actually resolved on the next microtask. But what's also really interesting here is that with mutations, like in this case, we're adding and removing groceries, we really want to be able to know when this happens, like subscribe to this promise in a component. So what you can do for mutations, which I found super interesting, is that you can just add signals for them. So here we have like an add grocery and remove grocery, but we also have a adding grocery and removing grocery signal. So when you add a grocery, what we return here is setting the value. Let me just, oh, sorry, that doesn't actually work. I had a feeling. Like a setter doesn't return the value you're setting. It just returns, we have to do this. So what you do, instead of just running the promise, and then you return a promise to React, which it can't handle in a good way, what you do is that you rather assign the promise of changing, adding the grocery in this case, to the adding grocery signal. And then optionally, you can return the promise as well. Maybe you do this from another store and you want to await the promise, for example. But what this allows you to do now is that you can use adding grocery in any component to know when that is pending, when it's fulfilled, and when it's rejected, which is pretty awesome. Return removing grocery value. This is how it should look. It actually reads better as well. So instead of having like, sorry, I'm eating chocolate. So the previous implementation with queries and mutations, they were more explicit about managing queries and mutations. But it was difficult to understand what the different methods meant. Like, what does a subscribe mean on a mutation? What does fetch mean on a query? And so on and so on. While here, it's just a signal. And you use it like any other signal. You observe it like any other signal. It's just that you have the value is a promise that you can check the status of. And the signal automatically updates as the promise updates. That's the only difference, which I found really interesting. Anyways, so what I thought we could do, yeah. And another thing about this, which I hadn't figured out how to do, is deriving promises. So I actually have an example of that. Maybe we can talk about it when we get there. But what's really cool about these promises just being a value in the signal that you can observe is that you can use derive. So I can use the derive thing from Impact. And so for example here, I can actually look at groceries. And then I can check the status. So let's imagine I want to derive some kind of value here, some derived value. So what I do is that I just check the status. If it's fulfilled, we're going to use the groceries value. which is a little bit weird, but that's how it looks now. Or I'll use an empty array. So what happens here is that if I were to consume some derived value, and if the groceries wasn't fulfilled yet, it will return an empty array. But as soon as the groceries are fulfilled, which happens like in the promise internally in the signal, it will flag this derived as dirty, and it will run again, and now it's fulfilled, and you get the actual value from the promise, which is really, really cool. And I never seen that before, deriving asynchronous values, which is freaking awesome that you can do that. I really think, at least at this moment, without having like done consumed it that much, I feel like this is how, like, just like how signals are, just has this really good fundamental idea of being observable. I feel like this promise implementation, first class support for promises and signals, is kind of, it should just be there. That should be like, if there was a specification for a signal, like my, how should I put it? I think like first class promise support should be part of that spec. Like I'm getting like this is like big words, but the point is that when I started looking at this and starting reflecting and started actually writing code for this, it was like, of course, it just solves everything in terms of consuming promises. Because for once, you can handle mutations. You can subscribe to mutations by just creating signals. You can consume like the promises becomes observable in components. You can just look at the status and render what you want. You can use the use hook on the promise itself to suspend it. You can even derive freaking promise values if you want to do that. Like, I haven't seen any other abstraction that allows you to do that. And it's no different. It's just a signal. It just happens to be a promise, which is really, really cool. Anyways, let's create some more code here. Let's just, so the Firebase store doesn't have any signals, so we don't have to do anything there. But let's take a look at our checklist item store. So here we're going to do a signal instead, and we're just immediately going to grab it like this. And it's just checklist items now. And then checklist items is a getter that returns the value of the signal. And then we have the same thing here where checklist items value is now promise.resolve the update because it's a promise. Oh, it's windy outside. Let's see. And remove checklist items. I'm trying to remember. I have one of these stores. I was. Is it the to-do store? I think. Where I really wanted to. Yeah, because there is. I want to derive a list of checklist to-dos, but I need both the to-dos and the checklist items to do that. And I wasn't able to derive this previously because both of them were promises, and using queries, there weren't any good way to kind of just consume them together and produce like a list of checklist to-dos. But now we can actually do that, which is really awesome. So I'm going to continue my little pattern of doing like, so with mutations, I have one signal, I have one method, which is like the, what do we call it? The imperative, like the verb of remove, in this case, remove checklist items by to do ID. And then the signal that holds the promise for performing that operation, I call like removing checklist items by to do ID. And I just make it a signal, and I can't remember what this actually returns. Can I see that now somehow? Hovering something? No. Oh, it's void. Okay. So this is just promise void. And then when we actually perform the removal, async yeah, and this is also interesting. So here you see that when I'm going to remove checklist items by to-do ID, I'm looking at the checklist items first to figure out which items I'm going to delete. So here I had like this query promise method, and it's like, okay, what does that do? It's so, like it's something you need to learn, like a specific API you need to learn. But here we know that the checklist items value is a promise. So we can just await that value. Oh yeah. What should we call it? God damn it. Checklist items. Lists. There we go. So yeah, I can just await the value because it's just a promise. And then we get the checklist items. I can figure out what to delete. And then what we're going to do is, instead of returning it, we're just going to say, oh, this is interesting because I really want this whole process to be the promise of removing checklist items by to-do ID. Yeah, that's interesting. Like there's two ways I can go about this. I can drop using async, or I could put like this logic into its own async function and just call it. I'm going to try without it for now. And then we're going to say checklist items value, and then we have the list, and then we're going to do this. Boop. Oh, this is interesting. Because oh yeah, this returns like an array of it's interesting because I don't really care about this returned value. It's just a typing thing. Like I don't care about this array of voided promises that's returned by calling delete doc. But at the same time, I want this promise all to be part of the promise so that it actually awaits the promise all. So I kind of have to return it. But I guess I can just solve this by making this like an array of promise void. Can I do that? Or do I have to say array? Like this? No, what the hell? Type is missing. Oh, what the? Oh, sorry. Is it this? Oh, that's the typing. So I'm returning. Is that what I'm returning? Yeah. I'm returning an array of voids. Well, I guess that's correct. And then just for fun, I'm actually going to return this. I don't really care about this because I'm calling this from the components and I don't want to manage the promises, the return promises from the components. I rather want to subscribe to the promise itself. Like you can, this is the thing about mutations, is that when you do queries and you want to consume the promise from a query, you do that directly in the component. So if you do function some component and you consume a query, you will just do that by data, fetch data, something like that. And this returns the promise, and fetch data just returns the same promise every time. But when you do a mutation, then you have something like an on click or something, and you do mutate data. But then you want the UI to change when you mutate that data. So if you take like the promise here, that doesn't make any sense, right? Because now you have to manually update some internal state in the component to show the state of mutating that data. So what you want to do, arguably, or what I realize, is that you need to have a signal or some other entity that represents the state of this mutation. So you would do mutation would be mutating data, to follow my recent convention. And then you can look at mutation status equals fulfilled, or if it's pending, you probably want to disable something. So that's like the huge difference, is that a query, you can kind of put the signal and like you can return the signal itself from fetch data because you want to consume it directly in the component as you call it. But that's not true for mutations. Those are decoupled. You want to first consume the state of the mutation, which is like idle, and then you call that mutation from like a user interaction. It's really interesting. Like maybe for you this is like, yeah, of course you have to do that, but for me, kind of seeing how a mutation and a query is exactly the same in terms of like making a request, dealing with the promise, but how you deal with it in the component and how do you store the state of that, it has definitely not been obvious to me how to do that. But anyways, so we have our removing checklist items by to-do ID, and now that one's fine. And then we have set completed. And the thing is, like in this app, at least, I don't really care about the oh, what's that? Oh, is it the it's the it's the sun. That's weird. It's reflecting in an image on the wall. Let's see. Yeah, I guess that's a little bit better. That was weird. Anyways, in this application, I do not really use the mutation state because like it's Firebase and it optimistically updates the state, so it's like it's always instant regardless of like how much time it takes to actually store it on the server. What I would or should what I should use the mutation state for is when something bad happens, which I don't do. And that's because 99.99999% of the time it works. But let's be at least make it possible to do this. So I'm going to create signals for this. So setting completed is a signal, and I guess these are also promise void. And then we'll I wonder if I should actually return these in between here so we kind of see them together. And then set completed is this thing. Oh, wow, what did I do now? Oh, yeah. There we go. Wait, oh, there we go. And then this is setting completed value. And I'm also, just by convention, going to return the value like this. And then at least it's possible to look at the state of the mutation. And then we're going to do the same here for removing item. And that's also just a promise void, I guess. Let's see, removing item. There we go. Remove it. Oh, removing item. Yeah, this. Sorry, this is a bit boring. But I kind of have to do this. Value equals none. And then we have adding item. Adding item. Boop, 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 boop. Adding item. Let's see. There we go. 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 And then removing item value. Kind of boring to refactor this, but this is nice. And like the superpower of this is that any component can know about this state, right? Like typically add item and adding item is consumed in the same component, but it doesn't have to. You can subscribe to in any component whenever an item is being added, which is also an insane superpower, which we use a lot at Code Sandbox in our editor. Different parts of the UI needs to know about when other parts of the UI does something. So this is a really nice pattern for doing that. Okay. And then we have our dinner store. Should we maybe... This is a little bit boring. But it doesn't take that much time. I don't have that much stuff going on. So let's just continue and get this done. And then I'll try to be quick about it. Let's see, dinners.value equals promise.resolve. Oops. And then we have our dinners, return dinners.value. And then we have our, I really like how the naming just works here. Upserting dinner, that is new to me. I often have to like make tricks to the naming of this stuff. But it just naturally fits together. I like that. And then we're upserting the dinner. It should be like this, I think. No. Oh, what did I do now? Oh, there we go. So we're going to, oh, this is oh, it's an upload result. Okay, promise void. Okay, so it's an array. Okay. So, wait. What is the result here? So this returns, it gives promise of, okay, I think this would be, so it would be like void and upload result. Is that correct? Yeah, that's what we're returning. Okay. Yeah, so I think now we're getting to something interesting. Oh, I need to finish this one. Ah, did I do it wrong? Oh, it could be null. There we go. Okay. Let's see. And then we have get image URL. And what's interesting about this one is that we are, yeah, I haven't used this one yet. I think I'm doing this wrong. I think this should actually have been queries, like the old queries, because then the first argument is the first, yeah, this is a good one, because there's another aspect of this we haven't talked about, and that is now we've been only handling signals where we immediately go and grab the promise. But what about, in this case, we have get image URL, and you'll have, basically, you could call this like 10 times at the same time, and you want to track each signal, right? And normally this would handled internally in queries, but now we don't have any, there's no caching or anything going on here. Well, cache, how should I put it? Caching is the wrong term. We're not handling references. So the way you would do that, so the thing is, like, I might call get image URL, right, from a component, and the component might render again, which means it calls get image URL again, because I'm calling get image URL directly in the component body. And it might, some other thing might cause it to render again, and then it's called again. But we don't want to go and grab a new image URL because of that. So the way you handle that is that you just have a record of, what's it called? Image URLs. And that record is, in this case, is a string. Or you could use a map for this. Maybe there's something else you want to use as a reference. But what we put here is a signal of promise. I think it's a string, because it's an image URL signal. So we have this record, and the only thing we need to do is, first of all, remove this queries thing, remove that. And what we do is that we say existing image URL would be image URLs, sorry, dinner ID. Right, so we're checking if we already have it. And if we don't, sorry, I'm going to make this a let. If we don't have the existing image URL, then we go and grab it. So then we say existing image URL equals image URLs dinner ID equals a signal of grabbing the image. and then we just return it. So that means if the component, so first of all, now we created a possibility to observe the changes to grabbing this image URL. What we also manage now is that if this get image URL is called multiple times for the same dinner ID, it just returns the same signal, right? So that's how you. So if you were to have a store that would have something like fetch post and you pass it an ID, you would just create a record, and then that kind of acts as your cache as well. So you can choose when do you want to dispose of, for example, if you're grabbing a post, and for the longevity of that session, you will always get like the latest, you will always get the initial post because that's how you store it. But at any moment in time, by any mechanism, it being like an interval, it being focusing the browser, the number of entries in your record, it doesn't matter. You can just remove it, and then the next time it's being accessed, it will fetch again. So you have much more low-level control of the caching mechanism and coding control of the caching mechanism, as opposed to a bunch of different kinds of options, which I personally really like. But yeah, so family store is done, grocery store, and then we have session store. How does this look like? So I think this one's actually okay. Yeah, because we are using the state coming from we are using the on auth changed. So when you sign in, we don't actually deal with the promise there. We rely on the existing on auth changed to kind of track the state of the session. And then we have our to-do store. Let's see. Oh. And again, we're just going to use a signal. Like this app is, by the way, going to be the reference app for Impact. And this will give you a ton of insight into how to deal with different things. So that's really nice. So let's say to-dos here, and it's a signal of and then we say to-dos value equals promise.result update, and then we have get to-dos, we return the to-dos value, and then we have our adding to-do signal, which I guess is a promise of void, and let's just return that as well, return adding to-do value. And then we'll remove this mutation. And we're not going to make it async. We're going to remove that and this. So let's see how we would do this one. So we have our adding to do signal, which we're going to say is set doc, then set result. Let's remove that, and then we'll shove this thing in here. We'll return adding to do dot value here, and then here we can actually just return. So I guess this value is a little bit different. It type void. Oh, it's just an array of void. That's nice. What's that? Type and type promise void. Oh, or undefined, of course, because I have an if statement around this promise all, so it might be undefined. So either it's a promise void or it's undefined. Like I could probably just put like, I could put any here or unknown maybe, but now I'm being very explicit. It's kind of weird that like this is Firebase and we don't care about the promise result. You probably actually get the result on normal APIs. But anyways, that's that one. And then we have archiving to do. And let's say that's void then. And then we'll get archiving to do. Archiving to do not value. And then we'll remove that thing and don't make it async. Can I remove this? Oh, that's wrong. That's how we do it. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to say todos.value. Then question is, what do we call this? Let's just call it list. And let's put this stuff in there. So we have the list of to-dos. By the way, this is going to be archiving to-do.value, and then we're going to return that. And then we need to, oh, this is interesting, because when we're archiving the to-do, we also want to go in and, oh, this one's interesting. Oh yeah, I guess it's fine. Here we actually had a case for using the promise, because this one's returning the signal promise or undefined if there aren't any checklist items on this to do. But what we can do here is basically just return this, and then we want to delete it. So I think we can just do that on the next. Then. Yeah. You can argue, like, if you want to do like async await, you can still do that by using like an immediately invoked function. Is that the name of it? Or you can like create async functions somewhere else. Personally, I think this is, at least my current impression is that this is better. Okay, well, that's nice. That's the to-do store. And then we have our user store. That's already just a signal. We have our view stack store. Oh yeah, and that's also a thing. I removed immer, because previously you could use a function to set the value, and that wouldn't make sense for promises, right? So I removed immer because it was like an exploration, but I think it's making too much of an opinion. You can still just install immer and use it. But here we are going to do the normal thing, which is concat view and replace. That's the trickiest one. How do we replace? We have to slice. I hate slicing. Views.value slice views.value.length. It's so, I really wish arrays had like a an immutable API. It would help. Or like, yeah, you know what I mean. I guess slice is that, because you can also add stuff, can you? No, you can't add anything. So we have to still concatenate the view after that. We want to remove the last one. So what the hell does that mean? Returns a copy of a section of an array for both start and end. Like, it's easier to just make a copy. Like, it's easier to just slice the array, then pop it, and then add the new view, and then just assign it as a new value. Then, but this is like, it seems more proper. Yeah, we're going to do that because this is too difficult for me. We're slicing it, then we're popping. No, wait, okay, we're going to make the slice thing work. I'm going to be like a proper developer here. But I have to check. So if I have an array of foo bar and I want to remove the last one, then it's this. So it's the length minus 1. Okay. Views.value.length minus 1. And then we concat that thing. And then to properly pop, we just do this. I could install Immer here, and then we would use that. Yeah, it's interesting. Because like this is super hard to understand. Like, right? That this means replace the last item of the array, and it's insane. Like who? I'm not saying splice is much better. Like if you had replace last, then it will help. Anyways, let's do that for now. Or should I install Immer just for that? I'm probably going to use it for other things. Okay, let's do that. Immer is awesome. Imser. Oops. Oh, you're an add Immer. So let's just put this back. Put it back. All we have to do is produce use.value. I think this is how you do it. And then produce views.value. That's how we do it. There we go. The overhead is like you have to understand what produce is. Like you have to know what Immer is. And that's the thing I noticed working in teams is that you might make decisions. So as an example, you might make a decision at the start of the project to use Immer. And then everybody's aligned on that because the people there made a decision together. But then someone leaves the team, someone's added to the team, and nobody really explains that, oh, by the way, we're using Immer. And then you have tons of code using produce, and then you have tons of code just using slice. That is really interesting. I think I talked to someone about this. Like how to use linting rules to enforce code conventions. So it's not about like detecting errors. I guess you could state linting is kind of like that, but not to the extent that it would say whenever it finds a slice, it would actually give an error and say you should use Immer here. Like what I mean is like team specific linting rules. It's an interesting concept. Anyways, so that's the view stack store, and then we have our weak store. And let's see how we're gonna do this. Let's see. So we're going to use a signal here instead. And that signal is going to be with default to an empty document. Not sure what I mean about that. So let's just call it weak. Can I do that? And then week to do's. And then that's grabbing this would be week value promise of resolve at update. And this would be week to do's value equals promise of resolve. And we have the week, we have the week to do's, and we have our disposer. Previous, current, next. Which are the promise? Yeah, so this should be fine. Yeah, so what we're going to do here is previous week would not be this, but it would be previous week.value. This is boring. The good thing about using getters, like I would imagine the immediate response to like using these getters to expose signals in this case is like, ugh, why are you doing that? But a hidden thing about getters is that your value becomes read-only. And that's exactly what you want in React. When React is consuming data externally, it shouldn't, or any data for that sake, or for that matter, it shouldn't change it. It should be considered read-only. And that's something you get out of the box with a getter. So that's actually really nice. So this would be return previous week to do's value. This is nice. I like this. Current week. And we'll return current week value. Get current week to do's, and that will be current week to do's dot value. I should probably, I'm not sure why I have these as I think I should do I should do this instead. So whenever I get so this is interesting, right? If I split it up like this, whenever I consume, so this has had some iterations, so it didn't look like this from the beginning, but anyways, if I were to split up previous week and previous week to do's, now my components is a bit optimized, because if one component consumes previous week and another component consumes week to do's, they only update when the specific signal updates. What I was going to do now is kind of do get previous, and then I would return ID, which is previous week ID, and I would do week, which is previous week value, and so on. What happens now is week.value, and then to-dos. Let's call it week to-dos. Previous week to-dos.value. What happens now is that whenever I consume previous, I will also subscribe to both week updates and week to-dos updates, regardless of the component actually only using one of them. What I could do, I could do a getter here as well. That's funny, but I don't think that's an issue. But I do like that we put these together. It makes the API a bit more consistent. So we're going to do that. And then we're going to say current week ID, current. And then we have the same for next. And then we have next week ID, next, and next. Cool. And then we have set next week to do activity. And then we want a signal for that, which is called setting next week to do activity, which I guess would be a signal of promise void. What did I do? There we go. And then let's take a look at this one. Yeah, and this is also interesting because we just talked about how we were grabbing the image URL, right? And we used a record to keep a reference to the signal produced when you go and grab image URL. But now we're doing a mutation. And from a UI perspective, we want you to be able to like, maybe I'm doing something this week and then on that to do ID, oh, wait a minute, do we, okay, this is a hypothetical, hypothetic, I never, yeah, you know what I mean. In theory, you might want to do that. Like you want to lock the UI for that specific to-do ID. But that means that the mutations are now can't be tied to a single signal, right? You have a signal per to-do ID. But then you use the exact same approach. You make a record of setting next week to-do activity. So you have a record of signals instead of, and then you check, do I already have the signal there? And in this case, we will probably always replace it, I guess. Or do we even care? Well, oh, sorry. Yeah, so I guess it depends on the behavior you want. So let's imagine you are setting the next week to do activity for a specific to do, and then you lock the UI. Yeah, exactly. And then the next time you would call set next week to do activity, that signal promise would be resolved or fulfilled or rejected for that matter. And if it's fulfilled, you could choose to just set the value again. Yeah, that's really interesting. Because on a query, you really always want to return what you already have. While here, you only want that signal to live there. I got a message from my... This is the kind of stuff that we're dealing with. It's like our youngest taking one of the toys from the oldest. Anyways, yeah, I'm trying to... Do I have any way to answer? Yeah, I do. 2 seconds. Oh, they found it. Anyways, so this is just, in this case, we don't care, right? We just want to run set next week to do activity. We don't even want to show anything in the UI, really. But let's imagine we do. So maybe one of these set next week to do activity would fail. Oh, this is interesting. So the UI is like you have this to do, and then we have all the days of the week, and then you should be able to like tap on the day of the week that you're going to do that to do. And then the thing is, we don't, like, in terms of user experience, we kind of want you to just go through and tap it, right? But at the same time, yeah, this is interesting. So let's imagine, how would we deal with errors here? Like, we don't want to show any indication when it's pending. We don't care about showing anything when it's fulfilled, but we want to say that for this specific week index, weekday index, it failed. What does that mean? And what it really means is that now you, and this isn't about like the approach we're doing here with promises and signals. This is a general challenge. How do you like keep a cache of that specific mutation? I guess in something like use query, you would do something like use, what's it called? Use query. And then the key would be something like to do ID, weekday, index, like activity, something like this. Yeah, maybe we could do something like that. So you would kind of create a cache key to kind of keep a reference to it. But the problem is that you don't have, well, not a problem, but that's the mechanism you have. But here we could do the same. So you could have like a record of to do activity, and then you have a record of, well, weekday index. Let's just call it string. And then as we see, it's always like promise void here for some reason. Or sorry, signal of promise void. So now you would be able to have a reference. But it's also interesting because yeah, this is really interesting. Because this is such a, oh, this is really interesting. Because how do you actually want to deal with this? So in terms of the UI, you don't really, when you render a component, you don't want to subscribe to individual setting of next to do activity. Like, sorry, this is hard to reason about when you don't have the UI. I can actually show you the UI, sorry. So this is like plan next week, to-dos. This is the UI. So you can imagine like when I do something here, like nothing really happens. But the point is I really want to at least be able to figure out if an error has happened. This is so interesting. How would I want to, because from one aspect, like it's the same here, like with use query, you wouldn't do it like this because you don't want to track individual. Well, I guess maybe that's what you would want to do. So this is not about like just how you structure it here, but it's also how you do it in a component. So with use query, you would actually, then it would actually be nicer with use query, I think, because you would just make each of these buttons use query for that specific to do ID and weekday index, and then it would do the mutation, and each of these would know if they error or not. But here we kind of moved this logic up, so it's like shared, not even by a to do, but also by the whole page, really. So then you don't have that granularity. This is really interesting. This is really interesting. Because if we were going to follow the pattern that we already have, then you would have like get, like you couldn't have setting next week to do, well, I guess you could. You could do this and then we would return setting next week value. But that means that each of these components would use, oh wait, sorry. Oh, sorry. So this, yeah, oh, this is interesting. This is really interesting because this wouldn't be, well, it depends on how you want to do it. Oh, okay. So this is my first, like, how the hell would you solve this in a good way? Everything up to this point has been so straightforward. And regardless, like, for me, the win is the sum of this is much bigger, especially when we get to the derived stuff. That's going to be pretty huge. But how would you deal with this scenario? Because now setting next week to do activity isn't a signal, it's a record of to do ID and weekday index. I guess number is the right thing to put here. But now one problem is that now you're actually like accessing the record, so you also access the signal, meaning that you would have to use like dot value inside the component, which hasn't been the case up until now. So what you could do is make it a function instead, but then you're calling a function to kind of get the value, which is fine, but yeah, this is really interesting. How would I want to solve this? Maybe there's something I'm not thinking about. Because it, like, I could make the whole thing. Yeah, no, I couldn't do that. I couldn't make the whole thing a signal. Oh, this is so interesting. Huh. I think I need to think about this one for a bit. How will I do this? How would I want to do this? I guess the most straightforward way is this would rather be a record. Like the most straightforward way is to just expose setting next week to do activity, and then it would the component would use to do ID and weekday index to look up the mutation. Um, but then, as I said, then it actually gets the well, that's also interesting. Like it doesn't necessarily have to be. Yeah. No, it would have to be this way. But it's interesting. Like it's an extremely complicated UI though. So normally, like what I would normally do here is if this failed, setting the next week to do activity, I think Firebase automatically resets it. Uh, but Yeah, that's also interesting. I haven't actually looked at this because doing this transaction, I think that doesn't optimistically set it. So you have to do it manually on transactions, which is going to be interesting. Anyways, if I had notifications, so I wouldn't like build an error inside each of these buttons to indicate that, oh, by the way, this single click failed. It would rather be like a notification stating that could not add Thursday to this to do, for example. And then it would just revert. In that sense, the UI wouldn't care about this. Like you wouldn't have a mutation kind of thing like this because you don't want to track the state of individual days in the UI. You just have like this general notification popping up if one of them fails. That's also really an interesting point of view because it's like, because this, as I said, this ties into the complexity of the UI. And if you want to manage every individual click here and you want to reflect if any of them errors, it leaks into the complexity of your state as well. As opposed to, okay, I just want to fire the thing, and if it fails, there's a notification popping up. There's a much simpler UI. Which also makes the management of that UI simpler. It's interesting. So I have to make a decision here. So I think for this app, I wouldn't really... Oh, did he wake up? For this application, I don't really want to track errors. I would prefer just showing a notification if something went wrong, because Firebase will revert the thing anyways if it fails. I think. But I just want to reflect and talk about it, because that's not the case for every application. And I wonder how Firebase optimistic fail. Oh, that's not what I was looking for. Anyways. Yeah, this one is an interesting one. If I wanted, so to put it like this, if I wanted to track each click per component, when it's pending, when it's success, when it's failed, I would have to have a signal for each of them. I could have a signal for like the whole to do, but the problem is that, having a signal for the whole to do, that means that I could click two of them and then the first one fails, but then I've kind of overridden it with the next one. Like, how would I store that? Yeah, I could have like one promise and I will kind of build upon the promise. So I would have like one signal per to do, or one promise per to do. But then as I when I tap this one, then I tap that one, I will kind of extend the existing promise. So it will run the next one when the previous one is done. And if the previous one has an error, it wouldn't even run the next one. But I guess that's not the experience I want regardless. I do want to track them individually. Yeah, and if I want to track them individually, the only way to do that is to store them individually. But the great thing is that I can just observe it. So I can just access the setting next week to do activity in the component, observe it, and then I would know if it fails or succeeds, which is what I want. Or I could just drop the whole thing and I could just do a catch. And if there's a catch, I have like my notification store and I just trigger a notification that something went bad. Which is, as I said, most likely what I would do for this app. Because it's, yeah, Firebase is reliable and it's... And as I think it also reverts automatically when changes fail. Cool. I wonder if I should stop streaming. But you know what? We are like, all the stuff I put in here now is for observability's sake. So we're going to implement this that way. So we're going to keep this one. And then setting next week to do activity is a record, but it's a record of void signals. Oh, it's not one. So a record. I wish I could name this. Can I do that? No, that's kind of sad. In this record definition, you can't define what the... Like you can in an array. Like you can say type and then owner string repo string. You could do stuff like that, which is really nice. But yeah, here you can't do that, which is fine. Though this is interesting though, because I want to this isn't as easy as I can't just do this, right? Because I need my component to actually reconcile when I add the mutation to this record. So that means I need this whole thing to be a signal. Yeah, like everything I've done up until now has been observing dinner. It's like you have the signal already, and that's what you return, so that's what you're observing as well. What we hit here is you need to oh, this is so interesting. Like this is so interesting. Yeah, this is really interesting because what we actually need here, wow, this is a complicated one, because we actually want this whole freaking thing to be a signal. That's a complicated signal. Because what we need is whenever this record changes, whenever we add a to-do with the related... Oh, wait, I'm making this harder than it really is. Yeah, so we don't need like this duplicate thing or like a nested record. There's no reason to have that. So this this string is the to-do ID plus the weekday index. You don't have to do that nested thing. But then each of the entries is a signal promise, so that whenever that promise updates, we have observability on it. But we also need to know when consuming this record, when it changes, so that we can actually access the signal we're going to track. This is really interesting. So how would this actually work in a component? I would render out this day, and there's no mutation there, no observing, and then I would have access to the setting next week to do activity signal there. I would use that, and then I would check, do I have like a signal running for this to do ID and weekday index, and I don't have it. And then I call the mutation, it adds it to the record, which makes that component reconcile, but it also makes every single component reconcile, right? Which is not really what we want. If we're kind of like, this is, I'm making way much, I'm completely over engineering this, but this is what we're doing now. We're exploring this API and see where it has issues. But like I would do with any component like this, is that I will make the to do itself. Yeah, this is so interesting. So each to do could have access to this record and listen to it. But that means every time you click this, every to do will reconcile, right? You really just want that one thing that you're clicking to reconcile, because that's the only thing that cares about it. Oh my god, this is interesting. So this is definitely where, like, it's so specific how the data fetching works. Like typically, yeah, so this is interesting. So normally data fetching is something that is broad, like it covers a lot of your app. For example, the list of to-dos here, that's for the whole page, right? But this is such a minor point of like a request. It's for this tiny little button here. There's an isolated round trip of keeping track of a promise. And currently the only place to do that is on the full page, like in the to-do store. And that means that you risk everything reconciling just by clicking this one thing. I find that super fascinating. So what we could do here is that we could think about each of these to-dos as their own scope. That's also a way to think about it. So that each of these, like, it's a complicated UI. You have like these things, you have other people adding things here. You can archive it. So you could create a scope for it, and then each of these to-dos would have their own store. So that when you manipulate a single to-do, only that to-do actually changes. Yeah, this is so interesting. So this is the case where like local component. Yeah, and again, like use query. You would like use query on each of these buttons. So that, because it's local, well, that, yeah. Oh, it's so interesting. But one of the challenges here is that it's actually a mutation. It's not a query either. because here we could create, like we could make our mutations work like a query. So you would kind of, how should I put this? How would that work? So it would be kind of, when you call this, it's not to perform it, it's to like create the mutation. And then you return the function to actually mutate, and you would also return the signal, which keeps track of the, lets you observe the mutation. And then you would cache that. So you would have that in a record. Ah, this is so interesting. This is so interesting. But yeah, as I said, like the absolute simplest way to deal with this is you just trigger a notification if something goes wrong. Oh fuck, I have to stop. The battery. Oh, Siggy, hi. I have to go, sorry. There was a confusion. The battery went out on the baby call, and I thought my partner picked up our kid, and he's probably outside crying. So I have to go. But yeah, I'll reflect a bit more on this, and then I'll give you an update. Bye for now.